Eddie Van Halen lit up stages with his electrifying guitar solos and unforgettable concerts that millions of fans still talk about. But behind the music, his life was filled with struggles, loss, and unanswered questions. What happened to the legendary guitarist's home, his wealth, and what's left of his legacy after his passing? Let's tell you about Eddie Van Halen's untold story and what's been left behind. Eddie Van Halen's house and 5150 studio. There was a time when Eddie Van Halen's fingers weren't just crafting riffs on a guitar. They were laying the bricks of his dream. Somewhere in the hills of Coldwater Canyon, Los Angeles, he created more than just a home. He built a sanctuary, a place where sound wasn't just heard, it was born, shaped, and perfected. But getting there wasn't easy. Long before the world knew the name Van Halen, Eddie was just a young Dutch immigrant trying to find his way in Pasadena, California. He didn't speak much English, but music, that was universal. He and his brother Alex spent hours jamming in their garage, hustling through gigs, battling self-doubt, and sleeping next to their gear because they couldn't afford a proper space. Eddie's guitar wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. In the early 1980s, Eddie found himself at a crossroads. Frustrated with the constraints of commercial recording studios and creative disagreements with producer Ted Templeman, he yearned for a space where he could have complete artistic freedom. As he candidly expressed, "I wanted more control. I was always butting heads with Ted Templeman about what makes a good record." As Van Halen rose to fame, Eddie started dreaming bigger. He didn't just want success, he wanted freedom. Freedom to make music without interference, without red tape, without record label pressure. That dream became 5150 Studios. Eddie purchased his Coldwater Canyon property in the early 90s, back when he was married to actress Valerie Bertinelli. But this wasn't just about finding a fancy home in the hills. Eddie wanted a place that reflected his soul, a private world where music reigned. That's when the 5150 Studios were born. The studio's design was meticulous. The control room measured 17 feet wide by 14 feet deep, with a ceiling height sloping from 12 to 10 feet. The adjacent studio space was 17 feet wide by 23 feet deep, also with a sloping ceiling. To ensure optimal acoustics and sound isolation, the construction incorporated multiple layers of insulation, specialized wall treatments, and a floating floor system. Notably, the walls were so robust that they were tested and found to be bulletproof against a .44 Magnum at close range. Now, 5150 wasn't your average home studio. This was Eddie's sonic temple. He built it with obsessive detail, from the acoustics to the gear. He even hired a friend to help with construction, doing much of it himself to avoid permits, because nothing was going to slow him down. One unique challenge was the proximity of a 50,000-watt AM radio station, which caused interference in the studio's equipment. To combat this, the studio was enveloped in grounded chicken wire, effectively creating a Faraday cage that shielded it from external radio frequencies. Inside, the studio was equipped with state-of-the-art gear, including a UREI 24/12 console, Ampex tape machines, and a JBL/Augsburger monitor system. The studio's ambiance was intentionally minimalistic, with finishes halted once the acoustics were deemed perfect. As Eddie and his team put it, "Our attitude on the finish treatment was to stop the finishing work when things sounded right." Inside those walls, magic happened. From the shimmering power chords of Right Now to the raw energy of Pound Cake, 5150 Studios became the birthplace of Van Halen's post-David Lee Roth era and beyond. It was there that Eddie experimented, innovated, and created a sound so distinct it changed rock music forever. That studio wasn't just his workplace, it was his lifeline. The house itself was warm but practical. It wasn't dripping in gold or overly lavish. It was personal, a reflection of a man who loved his craft more than fame. There was a sense of privacy around it, a fortress of peace for a man constantly pulled by the chaos of fame and addiction. Through divorce, health battles, and the wear and tear of the industry, the house remained his constant. His son, Wolfgang, grew up there, often watching his dad disappear into the studio for hours, only to emerge with another riff that would shake the walls. Eddie was never one to brag about it. He didn't give interviews showing off the place. But to those who knew him, 5150 wasn't just a studio, it was Eddie. Every corner held a story. Every cable on the floor had been placed with purpose. But time has a way of turning pages. In October 2020, the world lost Eddie Van Halen, and with his passing, something changed. The energy around 5150 fell quiet. The house, once buzzing with amp hums and guitar guitar solos became still. Fans often wonder, will 5150 ever reopen? Will someone breathe life back into it? Or will it remain a frozen monument to a guitar god who once ruled the world from within its walls? There's something bittersweet about that house now. It tells the story of a man who started with nothing, built a legacy with his bare hands, and left behind not just records, but a real, physical place where creativity flowed freely. Though Eddie had built the dream home and a legendary studio that many could only fantasize about, life wasn't as perfect as it seemed, because the silence in his heart echoed louder than the music from 5150. Inside the love life of Eddie Van. Eddie Van Halen wasn't just a guitar legend, he was also a man who loved deeply, struggled quietly, and kept pieces of his heart with those he cared about most. While the world admired him for his music, his personal life had layers that many only learned about later. His love life, especially his 2 marriages, was full of connection, growth, and pain, making him as human as any of us. It all started back in 1980 when Eddie met actress Valerie Bertinelli. She was already a TV star, known for her role on One Day at a Time, and he was the rising star of Van Halen. They met backstage at one of his concerts, and there was an instant spark. Valerie once said in an interview with People, "I just saw this guy with a shy smile and wild energy, and I knew something was different." That spark turned into something bigger. Just 8 months later, they got married on April 11th, 1981. It was the kind of romance people dream about, fast, exciting, and full of promise. But real life doesn't always follow the script. While Eddie and Valerie clearly loved each other, they faced serious challenges, especially due to Eddie's struggles with addiction and the non-stop pace of fame. They had a son in 1991, Wolfgang Van Halen, and he became their center. Valerie once said in an interview, "No matter what was going on between us, our love for Wolfie was always steady." But over the years, things grew difficult. The stress, distance, and Eddie's health issues caused tension. By 2001, they separated, and their divorce was finalized in 2007. Still, their bond never truly ended. Valerie and Eddie remained close. They co-parented Wolfgang with care and respect. In fact, Valerie was there at Eddie's side when he passed away in 2020. She even shared in her memoir Enough Already that Eddie told her and Wolfgang, "I love you," just before he passed. "We were more than friends even after the divorce," she wrote. "We were family." After Valerie, Eddie found love again, this time with Janie Lisewski. Janie worked in the entertainment world as a publicist and had also been a stuntwoman. She met Eddie through work, but their relationship turned personal over time. In 2008, Eddie proposed, and in June 2009, they got married at his home in Studio City, California. His brother Alex, who was also Van Halen's drummer, officiated the wedding. It was small and private, with only close friends and family. Janie was a strong support system for Eddie, especially during the later years of his life when he was battling cancer. She helped him through treatments and stayed by his side through the ups and downs. She once said in an interview with People, "We didn't have to be loud about our love. We just lived it every day." Their relationship was more quiet and grounded compared to his first marriage. They weren't in the spotlight much, but their life together seemed stable and comforting. Janie even started working with Eddie more closely, managing aspects of his music and legacy. Though they didn't have children, they built a life full of shared memories and support. Still, that doesn't mean everything was perfect. Life with a music icon comes with pressure. There were moments when Janie had to watch Eddie struggle with health issues and the pain of aging as an artist, but through it all, they stayed together. When Eddie died in October 2020, Janie shared a heartfelt message on social media. "My heart and soul have been shattered into a million pieces. I never knew it was possible to cry so many tears." Interestingly, Valerie was also there during Eddie's final moments, along with Wolfgang. The image of both his wives, one past, one present, coming together at his side, says a lot about who Eddie was. Despite the fame, the headlines, and the chaos of rock and roll, his life was built on love. Sometimes that love changed form, but it never really disappeared. Wolfgang, now a musician himself, has spoken about how his parents always made him feel supported. In interviews, he said, "My dad and mom were very different people, but they both showed me what it means to care about someone deeply, even when things don't go perfectly." Eddie Van Halen's love life wasn't flashy or scandalous. It was real. It had joy, heartbreak, reunions, and growth. His story reminds us that even those who seem larger than life go through the same emotional highs and lows as everyone else. His relationships weren't just chapters in his personal story. They shaped his music, his choices, and even how he faced the end of his life. Whether it was the young love he shared with Valerie or the steady partnership he built with Janie, each relationship left a mark on who Eddie was, not just as a guitarist, but as a father, husband, and human being. Eddie Van Halen may have been one of the greatest guitarists of all time, but to his son, Wolfgang, he was just dad. Behind the lights, guitars, and sold-out stadiums, Eddie's proudest role wasn't as a rock star, it was being a father. And the relationship between Eddie and Wolfgang was more than just love. It was a deep connection built on trust, music, and mutual respect. Their bond didn't come from fame. In fact, Eddie worked hard to make sure it didn't. He knew what it was like to grow up feeling pressure. As a child, Eddie had been pushed hard by his own father, Jan Van Halen, a professional musician from the Netherlands. Jan expected perfection. Practice wasn't optional, and there wasn't much room for mistakes. Eddie once said in an interview, he was tough. If you played a wrong note, you'd get smacked. That kind of childhood left a mark. So, when Eddie became a father in 1991, he promised himself he would be different. He didn't want Wolfgang to grow up afraid of failing or feeling like he had to earn love through performance. I just want him to be happy, Eddie told Guitar World in a 2008 interview. If music is what makes him happy, then great. If not, that's okay too. But music did make Wolfgang happy. And not because Eddie forced it on him, because it was already in his blood. As a young kid, Wolfgang would sit on the floor of the 5,150 studio, watching his dad rehearse. While most kids were learning the alphabet, Wolfie was picking up drumsticks. Eddie noticed early on that his son had a natural rhythm. Instead of pushing him, he let it grow. I never wanted to be the kind of dad who says, "You have to play music because I did," Eddie once said. I wanted to be the kind of dad who says, "Follow what you love and I'll be right there with you." That support meant everything. And in return, Wolfgang supported his father right back. When Van Halen needed a new bassist in 2006, Eddie didn't have to look far. Wolfgang had the talent, the discipline, and the heart to handle it. At just 15 years old, he officially joined the band. It raised eyebrows at the time, but Eddie knew what he was doing. He earned it, Eddie told Rolling Stone. He didn't get the job because he's my son. He got the job because he's that good. Being in a band with your father could be awkward, but for Eddie and Wolfgang, it was natural. They didn't just play together. They clicked. You could see it on stage, how they smiled at each other, how their eyes lit up during solos. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about fun, family, and creating something together. In interviews, Wolfgang would say, "Getting to be in a band with your hero, that's something not many people get to experience. I'll never take that for granted." When Eddie got sick, it was Wolfgang who stepped in quietly. Not as a rock star, not as a bandmate, but as a son. He helped manage appointments, traveled with him for treatments, and made sure his dad never felt alone. "I just wanted to be there," Wolfgang said in an interview with Howard Stern. "If I wasn't helping him through it, I don't know what I would have done." Even in those hard moments, their bond stayed strong. They laughed, shared stories, and jammed when they could. He'd be hooked up to IVs, and still he'd want to play, Wolfgang said. He was just that kind of person. Music was his therapy. When Eddie passed away in October 2020, the grief hit hard. But Wolfgang's tribute wasn't angry or loud. It was full of love. He wrote, "He was the best father I could ever ask for. Every moment I've shared with him on and off stage was a gift." That honesty connected with fans around the world. Everyone saw a son mourning not just a legend, but his best friend. Wolfgang later released his own music under the name Mammoth WVH, and the lead single, Distance, was written for his dad. The lyrics are simple, but full of feeling. In the song, he sings about missing Eddie, but knowing he's still with him. The music video features never-before-seen clips of Eddie laughing, playing guitar, and just being a dad. "He was the reason I do what I do," Wolfgang shared. "This is my way of keeping him close." What made Eddie and Wolfgang's bond so special wasn't just the music. It was how real they were with each other. There were no masks, no egos, just a dad and his son learning from each other every day. Eddie didn't have an easy childhood, but he turned that experience into something better for his own family. He broke the cycle. He raised his son with kindness, patience, and love, and Wolfgang never stopped appreciating that. No one knew that the man whose music was loud enough to shake stadiums was quietly fighting battles inside his own body, and in the end, it wasn't the stage that took him, but the sickness he hid so well. Silent health battles and tragic death.
If you make a mistake, try to do it twice and smile.
Eddie was always happy and cheerful. He didn't talk much about his health. He was never the kind of man to complain. Even when he was battling something as serious as cancer, he kept it mostly private. His fight wasn't for the public to see. It was for his family and himself. What many didn't know was that his health issues had started way back, long before his passing in 2020. In the early 2000s, Eddie was diagnosed with tongue cancer. At the time, he quietly underwent treatment, which included surgery that removed a portion of his tongue. He later said in an interview with Billboard in 2015 that he believed years of holding metal guitar picks in his mouth may have contributed to the cancer. While doctors never confirmed that theory, Eddie felt it played a part. After a few years of treatment, he was declared cancer-free, but that wasn't the end. In 2019, it was revealed that the cancer had returned, this time in a more aggressive form. This time it was throat cancer, and quietly, Eddie began traveling back and forth to Germany for treatment, something he didn't publicly share with fans at first. Throughout those years, Eddie continued to play music, work on his gear, and show up when he could. But those closest to him, like his son Wolfgang, saw the struggle. Wolfgang, who had taken up bass in Van Halen's later years, once said in an interview, "My dad was in pain a lot, but he never let it stop him from showing up at the studio or trying to smile around family. He always wanted to protect us from worry." That father-son bond became one of the most beautiful things to witness in Eddie's later life. They shared the stage. They laughed in interviews. They supported each other through everything. When Wolfgang released his own music after Eddie's passing, he said it was inspired by his father's quiet strength. In the years leading up to 2020, Eddie's condition worsened. His weight dropped. He became tired more easily. But even then, he rarely said a word about how much he was hurting. Close friends said Eddie would crack jokes even during hospital visits. He didn't want anyone to feel sorry for him. In October 2020, the silence finally spoke. Eddie Van Halen passed away at the age of 65 after a long battle with cancer. His death shocked fans around the world, not because they didn't know he was sick, but because many didn't realize just how hard the battle had been. Wolfgang posted a heartfelt message on social media, saying, "He was the best father I could ever ask for. Every moment I've shared with him on and off stage was a gift. It wasn't just a goodbye. It was a glimpse into the love and strength that defined Eddie's private world." Tributes poured in from around the world. Fellow musicians, actors, and fans shared how Eddie had changed their lives. Guitarists like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani called him a game changer. Tom Morello said, "Eddie Van Halen inspired every guitar player I know." David Lee Roth, his longtime bandmate, tweeted, "What a long, great trip it's been." Sammy Hagar, who had reconnected with Eddie shortly before his death after years of tension, said in interviews that he was grateful they had made peace. "I'm just glad we got to say I love you before it was too late," Hagar told Howard Stern. Even non-musicians like Lenny Kravitz, Valerie Bertinelli, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson posted tributes, sharing memories and expressing sadness over the loss. One of the most powerful tributes came from Wolfgang himself. Instead of releasing a typical press statement, he poured his feelings into music. His song "Distance," released shortly after Eddie's death, was a letter in sound, a message of longing, love, and respect. Behind all the awards and solos, behind the flashy performances and iconic riffs, there was a man who just wanted to be there for his son, a man who kept his pain quiet, a man who smiled even when it hurt. That's the Eddie Van Halen many people didn't get to see, but those close to him will never forget. His home, once filled with music and laughter, grew quieter. His 5,150 studio, where he had recorded countless hits and created some of the most iconic sounds in rock history, stood still. The amps were off, the lights dimmed. The hum of his custom gear was gone. Eddie didn't leave behind just music. He left behind lessons about resilience, love, and living life without letting pain define you. He showed the world how to keep going, even when you're not okay, how to smile for your family, how to fight with grace. No one knew that a man whose guitar could fill a stadium was carrying so much silence inside. But that silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, and maybe that's what we remember most. Not just the sound, but the quiet too. Sure, here's a refined version of the rehook line without starting with "but." After the silence settled, a different kind of noise took over, whispers about Eddie's fortune. What happened to the wealth of this guitar legend? Everyone wanted to know. Net worth and legacy of Eddie Van. It didn't start big. Eddie's early days were filled with humble moments. Born in the Netherlands and raised in California, he shared a small home with his family. His father was a musician too, but money was always tight. That early exposure to both music and struggle shaped Eddie's values. He didn't dream of gold records, he just wanted to make music. Fast forward to the late 1970s, Van Halen exploded. Tours, albums, endorsement deals, money began flowing in, but Eddie didn't change much. He wasn't flashy. Instead, he started investing in what mattered to him: his home, his studio, and his gear. One of his biggest investments was 5,150 studio. He built it on his property in the hills of Studio City, California. Not just a workspace, it was his sanctuary. This private recording space became the birthplace of many Van Halen hits and solo projects. He poured love, money, and time into it. Over the years, it grew into one of the most iconic private studios in rock history. As success followed him, so did more investments. Eddie bought real estate, including his longtime Los Angeles estate, where he lived for decades. It was a quiet property, tucked behind trees and gates. Nothing too fancy by celebrity standards, but it reflected him. Private, practical, personal. He also spent wisely on gear and guitars. Some of his custom guitars and amps became legendary, later fetching hundreds of thousands of dollars at auctions. According to Forbes and Celebrity Net Worth, at the time of his death, Eddie Van Halen was worth an estimated $100 million. Where did that money come from? A mix of smart royalties, ownership of his music catalog, live shows, merchandise, and licensing deals. Unlike many stars, Eddie held on to his publishing rights. That alone made a huge difference. Every time a Van Halen song played on the radio, in a film or a commercial, he earned. He also partnered with brands. His EVH gear line, especially his signature Frankenstrat guitars and amplifiers, became massive with fans and musicians. These weren't just collectibles, they were quality tools for real players, and Eddie was involved in every detail. When he passed away in October 2020 after a long battle with cancer, the silence around 5150 Studio was deafening. The man who once filled it with sound was gone. But then came the question, who inherited his legacy? Most of his estate went to his son, Wolfgang Van Halen. Their bond wasn't just father and son, it was built through music. Wolfgang had played bass for Van Halen in its later years and had a close working relationship with his dad. In interviews with Rolling Stone and Howard Stern, Wolfgang said he wanted to protect what Eddie had built. He spoke with pride and sadness, saying, "I don't want Van Halen to be exploited. I want to do it right. I want to do it with integrity." Eddie's ex-wife, Valerie Bertinelli, also spoke publicly. In her memoir and interviews with People and Today, she shared that even after their divorce, Eddie remained part of her family. They co-parented Wolfgang with love and respect. "We were soulmates in a lot of ways," she said. Besides Wolfgang, Eddie's widow, Janie Lisowski, whom he married in 2009, was also part of the family he left behind. Though the details of his will weren't fully public, reports suggest that both Janie and Wolfgang had roles in preserving his work and estate. As for the money, yes, it was substantial. But Eddie's legacy was never about the dollar signs. It was about the music, the passion, the innovation. Wolfgang released his own album, Mammoth WVH, and in several interviews he said, "I'm not trying to be my dad. I'm trying to make music he'd be proud of." There are talks of preserving 5150 Studio, releasing unreleased tracks, and honoring Eddie's influence without turning it into a cash grab. Fans and fellow musicians, from Sammy Hagar to Ozzy Osbourne, shared tributes, calling Eddie one of the kindest geniuses and the Mozart of rock guitar. Over time, Eddie's estate will continue to earn from royalties, licensing, and his gear line. Wolfgang has said he's careful about what to release and when. In his words, "It's not about profit, it's about preserving something special," and that's the quiet truth about Eddie Van Halen's worth. Not just the millions he made, but the millions he moved with his music. He didn't care about headlines, he cared about sound, about craft, about connection. Today, his home still stands in Los Angeles. His studio still sits on that hill, quiet, for now, but not forgotten. Because Eddie didn't just build a life, he built a legacy, one chord at a time. What do you think was the most powerful part of Eddie's life? His music, his family, or his fight? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories.